14-year-old James watched from the alley as three armed men surrounded Jessica and her daughter Olivia outside their home, weapons drawn and voices threatening. He'd seen the Hells Angels patch on Lucas's bike in their driveway. These guys were here for revenge, and they had no idea the biker wasn't home. James had nothing, was nothing, just a homeless kid who'd slept behind their garage for weeks. But when one of the gunmen grabbed 8-year-old Olivia by the hair, something inside him snapped. He sprinted forward, his bony frame no match for grown men with guns, knowing this would probably be the last thing he ever did. What happened in the next 60 seconds would bring 500 bikers to their knees outside a hospital. But right now, all James could hear was Olivia screaming his name. "If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My mother said I wouldn't even reach 10,000 subscribers, but I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me show her that these tales matter. Please like and subscribe to Hells Angels Tales, and let's keep breathing life into stories that were never meant to stay silent." Enjoy the story. James crouched behind the rusted dumpster in the alley, his 14-year-old frame pressed against cold metal that still held the afternoon heat of the Phoenix sun. Sweat trickled down his spine beneath the donated t-shirt he'd been wearing for 3 weeks straight. His stomach cramped with hunger. He hadn't eaten since yesterday's half-finished burger he'd found behind the Wendy's on McDowell Road. But hunger became irrelevant the moment he saw 3 men step out of a black Escalade with tinted windows, the same SUV that had been circling this quiet suburban neighborhood for the past week. They moved with predatory purpose, hands disappearing inside tailored jackets where unmistakable bulges pressed against expensive fabric. James's survival instincts, honed through 6 months of homelessness, screamed danger so loud his hands began to shake. Across the street, 30 feet away, Jessica knelt on her front lawn beside her daughter Olivia. The 8-year-old was proudly displaying a crayon drawing of their family, her blonde hair catching the late afternoon light as she pointed out details to her mother. Neither of them noticed the approaching threat. Neither of them saw death walking toward them in broad daylight. James's mind raced through calculations. He could run, slip deeper into the industrial lot behind him, disappear into the network of abandoned warehouses where police never patrolled and questions were never asked. He'd perfected the art of invisibility, of being nothing and nobody, a ghost drifting through the margins of a city that had forgotten kids like him existed. 6 months ago, he'd had a name that mattered, a mother who loved him, dreams of coding artificial intelligence systems like the engineers working on ChatGPT in Silicon Valley. Then cancer devoured his mother in 23 days, and the state system tried to swallow him whole. He'd run from the group home in Atlanta where older kids sold fentanyl-laced pills to middle schoolers and social workers collected paychecks while children disappeared. He'd survived by staying invisible, by never getting involved, by understanding that heroes died young and unmissed. The lead gunman pulled his weapon first, a matte black Glock that seemed to absorb the sunlight rather than reflect it. James recognized it from movies, from news reports about Phoenix's escalating gang violence. "Jessica," the man called out, his voice carrying across the manicured lawns with casual authority. "Where's Lucas?" Jessica's head snapped up, her hazel eyes immediately registering the threat. Her nursing instincts, refined through 7 years of emergency room rotations at Phoenix General, kicked in instantly. She rose to her feet in one fluid motion, positioning her body between the armed men and her daughter. Her hands came up slowly, palms out, the universal gesture of non-aggression. "He's not here," she said, her voice remarkably steady despite the terror James could see in her rigid posture. "Whatever this is about, we can talk." "We know he's not here, sweetheart," the second man interrupted, raising his own weapon with practiced ease. A skull tattoo crawled up his neck, disappearing beneath his jawline. "That's exactly why we came now. See, your old man thought he could testify against Marco Vega's operation and walk away clean. Thought he could destroy 15 good men, send them to federal prison on RICO charges, and just go back to his happy little family." He gestured around the neighborhood with his pistol. "Nice house, pretty wife, cute kid. Lucas built himself a real American dream, while our brothers rot in cells. James felt ice flood his veins. Marco Vega. That name detonated inside his skull like a flashbang grenade, dragging up memories he'd spent 6 months trying to bury. Marco Vega's enforcers outside his Atlanta apartment building. His mother's terrified face as she'd confronted them, threatened to call police. Her impossibly rapid decline 3 days later. Cancer, the doctors said, aggressive and untreatable. But the timeline had never made sense, and his mother's final whispered words echoed in his memory. Run, James. They'll come for you next. The third gunman, shorter but carrying himself with the coiled violence of a street fighter, grabbed Olivia by her blonde hair. The child's scream shattered the suburban quiet, a sound of pure terror that would haunt James for the rest of his life. He yanked her away from Jessica with such brutal force that Olivia's feet left the ground momentarily. Jessica lunged forward with a mother's instinctive fury, but the lead gunman pressed his Glock against her forehead, the metal dimpling her skin. Call him, the gunman ordered, his voice dropping to something cold and final. Call Lucas right now and tell him Marco Vega sends his regards from federal lockup. Tell him we're taking everything he loves, just like he took everything from us. You make that call, or we start with the kid and make you watch every second. Your choice, Jessica. Choose fast. Time fractured. James watched Jessica's hands tremble violently as she reached into her pocket for her phone. He watched Olivia's small face contort with terror, watched tears stream down her flushed cheeks. He watched the third gunman's finger slide from the trigger guard to the trigger itself, casual and practiced, a man who'd done this before. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the lawn, and in those shadows James saw his own future. Another ghost, another kid who disappeared without leaving a mark, who'd survived his mother's death only to die hiding behind a dumpster while a little girl got murdered 30 feet away. Not her. The thought wasn't heroic. It wasn't brave. It was simple and absolute, rising from somewhere deeper than logic or self-preservation. Not like this. Not while I can still move. James didn't decide to act. His body simply launched itself forward, muscle memory from 6 months of running from danger suddenly reversing into a sprint toward it. His worn Converse sneakers, held together with duct tape and hope, barely touched pavement as he exploded from the alley. The gunmen were focused entirely on Jessica and Olivia, confident in their control, their weapons and reputation providing a false sense of security. That confidence gave James exactly 3 seconds of pure advantage. He covered 30 feet in those 3 seconds, his malnourished frame moving faster than it had any right to move. The lead gunman, Vince, the others had called him, sensed movement in his peripheral vision a half-second too late. He started to turn, started to bring his weapon around, but James was already airborne. The boy slammed into the grown man with every ounce of momentum his 110-pound body could generate. The impact drove both of them into the grass. James heard the air explode from Vince's lungs, felt the man's weapon slip from his grip. The Glock skittered across the lawn toward the sidewalk. Pain blossomed in James's ribs where they'd connected with Vince's elbow, but he ignored it, scrambling desperately for the loose weapon. His fingers stretched toward the grip, inches away, so close. Jessica's scream cut through the chaos. James, run. She recognized him instantly. The homeless boy who'd been sleeping behind their garage for weeks. The kid she'd silently left wrapped sandwiches and bottles of Gatorade for, never approaching, never forcing conversation, just leaving sustenance and hope. Grab Olivia and run. James shouted back, his voice cracking with adrenaline and terror. His hand closed around the Glock's grip, the weapon heavier than he'd imagined. But the second gunman was already adjusting, his pistol swinging toward James with professional speed. Jessica saw it happening, saw the trajectory that would put a bullet in the boy who'd just saved her daughter's life. She moved on pure instinct, her body acting before her mind could catch up. The third man still held Olivia's hair, distracted by the sudden chaos. Jessica drove her elbow into his throat with every ounce of strength her nurse's training had taught her about vulnerable points on the human body. The man's grip released immediately as he choked and staggered backward. Run to Mrs. Chin's house. Jessica screamed at Olivia. Lock the door. Call 911. Go now. Olivia ran, her small legs pumping, her pink backpack bouncing against her spine as she sprinted toward the neighbor's property, 2 houses down. James watched her disappear around a hedge, safe for these precious seconds, but his relief was short-lived. Vince recovered with the speed of someone who'd been in street fights since childhood. His hand clamped around James's wrist like a steel trap, twisting with brutal efficiency. James felt his bones grind together, felt his shoulder joint scream in protest, but he didn't release the weapon. Couldn't. If these men regained control, Jessica and Olivia were dead. The second gunman had a clear shot now, his weapon aimed at the tangle of bodies struggling on the ground. Move, Vince, he shouted. I'll drop this little bastard. Subscribe now. When real evil comes knocking, you'll want to know how this ends. Comment where you're watching from. James made a split-second calculation. He released the Glock and drove his fist into Vince's exposed throat, mimicking the move he'd just watched Jessica execute. His starving frame carried almost no power, but the vulnerable cartilage of a human throat didn't need much force. Vince gagged, his grip loosening for just 1 second. 1 second was all Jessica needed. She grabbed Olivia's abandoned bicycle from the lawn, a purple mountain bike with training wheels, and swung it like a Louisville slugger. The metal frame connected with the second gunman's skull with a sickening crack that echoed off the houses. The man staggered sideways, blood streaming from his temple. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing rapidly closer. Mrs. Chun had called 911 the moment she'd seen weapons drawn. Phoenix PD was 30 seconds out. The third gunman, still clutching his bruised throat, made the tactical decision. We're out, he rasped. Cops inbound. Move. But Vince wasn't thinking tactically anymore. Rage twisted his features into something inhuman as he stood over James, raising his Glock with cold, murderous precision. This little shit cost us the easy play, he snarled. He pays for that. The gunshot was deafening, a thunderclap that turned the suburban afternoon into a war zone. James felt the impact before pain registered, a sledgehammer blow to his left shoulder that spun his entire body sideways. He hit the grass hard, his vision immediately blurring as shock flooded his system. The world tilted at impossible angles, colors bleeding into each other like watercolors in rain. He heard tires screaming against asphalt, the Escalade peeling away from the curb with smoking rubber. He heard Jessica's voice, suddenly close and frantic, her hands pressing against his shoulder with pressure that sent lightning bolts of agony through every nerve ending. He heard Olivia sobbing from Mrs. Chin's porch, safe behind a locked door, but traumatized forever. Stay with me, James, Jessica begged, her nursing training overriding her terror even as tears streamed down her face, mixing with his blood on her hands. You hear me? You don't get to die. Not after what you just did. Stay with me. James tried to speak, tried to tell her about Marco Vega, about Atlanta, about the connections screaming in his fading consciousness, but his mouth wouldn't cooperate. Blood soaked through his threadbare shirt, spreading in a dark pool beneath him on the grass Lucas had mowed just yesterday. James had never thought seriously about dying. He'd assumed it would happen alone in some alley, unmissed and unnamed. Another statistic in a city that buried homeless kids in unmarked graves. This was different. Jessica knew his name. Someone was fighting for him. Someone cared if he lived or died. Patrol cars flooded the street, their flashing lights painting everything in alternating red and blue. Paramedics rushed forward with trauma kits and urgent voices. James felt multiple hands lifting him, felt the jarring movement of being transferred onto a gurney. Through the chaos, through the shock threatening to drag him under, he locked eyes with Jessica. The words bubbled up from somewhere deep and desperate, forcing their way past his failing strength. Tell Lucas, James whispered, each word costing him everything. The black SUV, been watching for days. Tell him. Jessica's face went pale beneath the blood spatters, her hands gripping the gurney's rail so hard her knuckles turned white. What? James, how do you know Lucas? How do you? But his eyes were already rolling back, his teenage body surrendering to trauma it was never meant to survive. Jessica pressed her fingers against his neck, searching for his pulse. She found it, rapid and thready and weakening by the second, the beat of a heart struggling against impossible odds. The lead paramedic barked into his radio, his voice clipped and professional, but edged with urgency. 14-year-old male, single GSW to left shoulder with through and through, significant blood loss, BP 70 over 40 and dropping, pulse 130 and thready. We need trauma bay 1 ready at Phoenix General, ETA 8 minutes. Advise surgical team, this is going to, or immediately. As they loaded James into the ambulance, Jessica climbed in behind him without hesitation. Olivia was safe with Mrs. Chun and 2 responding officers. Lucas was somewhere on Interstate 17, racing back from Flagstaff after her frantic call. But right now, in this blood-soaked moment, Jessica made a promise to the unconscious boy who'd traded his life for her daughter's. You're not dying alone. Not today. Not ever. I don't know who you really are, but I know what you did. And that means something. That means everything. The ambulance doors slammed shut, and they screamed toward Phoenix General, every second a desperate battle against the bleeding that wouldn't stop and the pulse that kept getting weaker. Lucas was 2 hours into the 3-hour ride back from Flagstaff when his phone exploded with Jessica's call. Her voice, normally calm even during crisis, came through his truck's speakers in fragments of panic and shock. Armed men. Olivia shooting. James is dying. He didn't remember making the decision to floor the accelerator. His Silverado hit 115 miles per hour on Interstate 17, weaving through traffic like a missile, his Hell's Angels patch visible in the rearview mirror to anyone he passed. Every second felt like drowning. He'd left his family vulnerable, left them alone while he attended a pointless club meeting about motorcycle rally logistics. And now some homeless kid was bleeding out because Lucas had made enemies with long memories and longer reach. The call went out through the Hell's Angels network at 4:47 p.m. By 5:15, club members across Arizona were mounting their bikes. The message was simple and devastating. Someone had attacked Lucas's family, and a 14-year-old boy had taken bullets meant for them. By 5:30, chapters from Phoenix, Tucson, and Prescott were rolling toward Phoenix General Hospital. By 6 o'clock, riders from Las Vegas and Albuquerque had gassed up and hit the highway. The Brotherhood didn't ask questions first. They responded. They protected their own. Lucas hit the hospital parking lot at 6:23 p.m., his truck's tires screaming as he carved into a space reserved for emergency vehicles. He didn't care. 3 officers tried to stop him at the entrance, but his club vice president, a man called Reaper, was already there, having made the trip from Prescott in record time. He's with me, Reaper told the cops, his tone leaving no room for argument. His family was just attacked. You want to stop him, you go through me first. The officers stepped aside. Lucas found Jessica in the surgical waiting area on the 3rd floor, her scrubs. She'd been about to leave for her evening shift when the attack happened, soaked with blood that wasn't hers. Olivia sat beside her, wrapped in a blanket despite the Phoenix heat, her eyes vacant with shock. When Jessica saw Lucas, she stood, and he'd never seen that expression on her face before, a mixture of relief, terror, and something else. Accusation, maybe, or awareness that their life had just shattered into pieces they might never reassemble. Where is he? Lucas asked, pulling both of them into his arms. Surgery. They've been working on him for 90 minutes. Jessica's voice was mechanical, clinical, the nurse in her retreating behind technical language to survive the emotional overload. The bullet entered his left shoulder, missed the subclavian artery by millimeters, punctured his lung, and exited through his back. He'd already lost almost 2 liters of blood by the time they got him here. The surgeon said. Her voice cracked. 40% chance, Lucas. A 14-year-old homeless boy has a 40% chance of surviving because he threw himself at armed men to save our daughter. Lucas felt something crack inside his chest. James. His name is James. I know his name, Jessica said quietly. He's been living behind our garage for 3 weeks. I've been leaving him food. I thought. I thought he was just another kid the system failed. I didn't know he'd die for us." The waiting room began to fill. First it was Reaper and 5 Phoenix chapter members. Then it was a dozen riders from Tucson. Then it was the Prescott chapter, the Flagstaff members, the smaller chapters from Kingman and Yuma. They filled the surgical floor, then spilled into the hallways, then flooded the main lobby. Hospital security tried to establish control, but there was no controlling 500 bikers united in purpose. They weren't causing trouble. They weren't threatening anyone. They were simply there, a sea of leather and patches and loyalty, waiting to hear if a kid they'd never met would survive the night. Lucas stood among them, drowning in guilt that threatened to pull him under. This was his fault. His testimony against Marco Vega's trafficking operation had sent 15 men to federal prison and destroyed a criminal network that had been operating across 5 states. He'd done it because he discovered they were trafficking teenagers. Kids pulled from homeless shelters, group homes, and street corners, sold to the highest bidder in an operation that stretched from Phoenix to Las Vegas. When Lucas had found evidence, files and photos that made him physically ill, he'd made a choice. He'd gone to the FBI. He'd testified in federal court. He'd helped put monsters away. But monsters had friends, and those friends wanted revenge. A surgeon emerged at 8:47 p.m., still in blood-stained scrubs, her face exhausted but professionally neutral. The waiting room fell silent, 500 bikers holding their collective breath. "Family of James," she called out. Lucas stepped forward, Jessica beside him. "We're here." The surgeon's eyes flickered to the patches, to the overwhelming presence of the club, then back to Lucas. "He's alive. We've stopped the bleeding, repaired the lung, and stabilized him in ICU. But he's critical. The next 72 hours will determine if he makes it. He's young, which helps, but the malnutrition and prior health issues complicate everything. We're doing everything we can. Like and subscribe. Stories this raw don't come around often, and you'll regret missing what happens next." Relief flooded through Lucas, immediately followed by renewed guilt. The kid was alive, but barely, and only because he'd sacrificed himself for a family he didn't even know. Lucas needed answers. He needed to understand why James had been there, why he'd intervened, why a homeless kid from Atlanta, Jessica had found a missing persons flyer in his backpack, had ended up behind their house in Phoenix. At 9:15 p.m., Detective Maria Santos from Phoenix PD's gang unit arrived with 2 uniformed officers and a tablet computer. She'd been investigating the attack, canvassing the neighborhood, pulling security footage. "Mr. Lucas," she said, her tone professional but not unsympathetic, "I need to ask you some questions about Marco Vega and why his people would target your family." Lucas's jaw tightened. He'd known this conversation was coming. "I testified against him 18 months ago. RICO case. Human trafficking operation." "I'm aware," Santos said. "I worked that case peripherally. What I'm trying to understand is the timeline and the boy's involvement. Your neighbor, Mrs. Chun, has a Ring doorbell. The footage is remarkable." She pulled up the video on her tablet. Lucas watched the attack unfold from a different angle. He saw James crouched behind the dumpster, watching. He saw the moment of decision when the kid launched himself forward. He saw the impact, the struggle, Jessica's desperate defense with the bicycle. He saw his daughter running to safety, and he saw the gunshot that dropped James to the grass. "The kid's a hero," Reaper said quietly from behind Lucas. "Damn fool hero." "There's more," Detective Santos said, her finger hovering over the play button. "Mrs. Chin's system has audio. We enhanced it. You need to hear what James said right before he charged." She pressed play, and the audio filled the quiet waiting room. James's voice, young and terrified but absolutely certain. "Marco, you son of a bitch." "Not her." The waiting room went silent. Lucas felt ice flood his veins. Detective Santos paused the video and looked directly at Lucas. "The lead gunman is Vincent Cardona, one of Vega's top enforcers. But here's what doesn't make sense. The kid recognized him. Called him by his boss's name before he even saw faces clearly. James knew who was coming and why." She leaned closer, her eyes sharp with investigative focus. "Mr. Lucas," This homeless boy didn't just happen to be in your alley. He knew Marco Vega personally. The question is, why would a 14-year-old kid from Atlanta recognize the face of a Phoenix-based trafficker on sight? Lucas's mind raced through implications and connections, through timelines and coincidences that suddenly felt like anything but coincidence. Before he could respond, a nurse burst through the ICU doors, her face tight with urgency. "We need family now," she said, her voice cutting through the murmur of 500 bikers. "James is crashing. We're losing him." Lucas sprinted toward the ICU with Jessica and Detective Santos close behind, leaving 500 bikers frozen in the waiting room like warriors awaiting orders they hoped would never come. Through the observation window, he watched 6 medical personnel surround James's bed in controlled chaos, their movements precise but desperate as monitors screamed warnings that cut through the sterile hospital air. The boy's chest jerked violently with compressions, his small frame looking impossibly fragile beneath the hands trying to force life back into a heart that had decided to quit. A doctor barked orders about epinephrine and cardiac rhythms, medical terminology that meant nothing to Lucas but everything to Jessica, whose face had gone white as fresh snow. 43 seconds stretched into eternity. Then the monitor found rhythm again, erratic at first, then stabilizing into something that resembled normal. James pulled back from the edge by sheer force of will and medical expertise working in desperate tandem. The attending physician, a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and exhaustion carved into every line of her weathered face, stepped through the ICU doors to address them. Her scrubs were marked with James's blood, dark stains that told their own story. "He's holding, but barely," she said, her voice carrying the weight of 30 years delivering bad news to desperate families. The gunshot trauma alone would be life-threatening for a healthy teenager. But this boy has severe malnutrition. His body mass index suggests months of starvation. We're also seeing signs of untreated infections, possible exposure-related illnesses, and stress indicators consistent with prolonged homelessness. His body is fighting a war on multiple fronts, and frankly, I don't know how he survived this long. She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "You need to prepare for the possibility that he might not make it through the night. I'm sorry. We're doing everything medicine allows, but sometimes that's not enough." Lucas felt those words like physical blows, each one landing in his chest where guilt had already opened wounds. This kid, this brave, foolish, heroic kid, had taken a bullet meant for Lucas's family, and now he was dying in a hospital bed before Lucas could even thank him, before he could understand why. "I need to see his belongings," Lucas said to Detective Santos, his voice rough. Everything he had on him when they brought him in. Santos hesitated, her investigator's instincts warring with human compassion. "It's all evidence in an active attempted murder case. Chain of custody matters for prosecution." "I don't give a damn about chain of custody," Lucas said, stepping closer. "That boy is dying upstairs because of choices I made, enemies I created. I need to understand why he was there, why he knew Marco Vega's name, why he sacrificed himself for people he'd never even spoken to. You want answers to those same questions, detective? So get me his belongings." Santos studied him for a long moment, then nodded. She made a call, speaking in low tones to someone at the evidence processing unit. 20 minutes later, 20 minutes that felt like 20 hours, a uniformed officer arrived carrying a clear plastic evidence bag. Inside was a single threadbare backpack, the kind schools gave away for free during back-to-school drives, covered in dirt stains, and where that spoke of hard miles traveled. Lucas took it to a private consultation room, one of those sterile spaces where doctors delivered terminal diagnoses and families made impossible decisions. Jessica and Santos followed, closing the door behind them to shut out the chaos of the hospital. Lucas upended the backpack onto the examination table, and James's entire worldly possessions spilled out like artifacts from a life interrupted. The inventory broke Lucas's heart piece by piece. 2 changes of clothes, both worn so thin he could see through the fabric in places, both stained with sweat and dirt and the evidence of sleeping rough. A toothbrush with bristles splayed in every direction from months of use. 3 protein bars still in their wrappers, carefully rationed. James had been starving, but still hadn't eaten his emergency supplies, saving them for when things got even worse. A water bottle, scratched and dented, the label long gone. A phone with a shattered screen, completely dead, probably hadn't held a charge in weeks. No charger. No way to reach out for help even if he'd wanted to. But it was the notebook that made Lucas pause. A composition book with a black and white marbled cover, water-damaged and dog-eared, filled with handwriting that shifted between careful and frantic. Lucas opened it to random pages and found code snippets, Python functions, JavaScript loops, attempts at building machine learning algorithms that showed genuine talent and ambition. Comments in the margins revealed a mind that understood artificial intelligence concepts, that had been teaching himself to code using nothing but stolen Wi-Fi and determination. Figure out how ChatGPT does natural language processing, one note read. If I can learn this, maybe I can get a job, get off the streets, make mom proud. Make mom proud. Past tense. Because mom was dead. At the bottom of the pile, wrapped carefully in a plastic grocery bag to protect it from rain and the elements, was a manila folder. Lucas's hands trembled slightly as he opened it, some instinct warning him that whatever was inside would change everything. The first item was a photograph, its edges worn soft from repeated handling by fingers that had touched it thousands of times. A woman in her early 30s with James's distinctive green eyes smiled at the camera, her arm wrapped around a much younger version of the boy, maybe 13, still carrying baby fat in his cheeks, still innocent of the horrors coming his way. They were at a park, autumn leaves in the background, both of them genuinely happy. On the back, written in fading blue ink, Mom and Me, Atlanta, January 2025. Exactly 1 year ago. 1 year between that photograph of happiness and James bleeding out on a Phoenix lawn. The second item was a death certificate from Grady Memorial Hospital in Atlanta. Catherine Marie Monroe, age 34, deceased March 15, 2025, cause of death listed as aggressive metastatic cancer with multiple organ involvement. But someone, James, his handwriting unmistakable from the notebook, had written in the margin in desperate, angry teenage script, 3 weeks. She was fine. Then 3 weeks later she was dead. And no one gets that sick that fast. They did this. Marco Vega's people did this. They murdered her. The third item made Lucas's blood turn to ice water in his veins. Newspaper clippings, at least a dozen of them, all printed from online articles about Lucas's own RICO testimony against Marco Vega's trafficking operation. The pages were worn from reading and rereading, and Lucas's name was highlighted in yellow marker throughout, with handwritten notes crowding every margin. Hell's Angels treasurer, Phoenix chapter, testified in federal court, February 2025. Vega's operation covered Atlanta to Las Vegas, Atlanta, where Mom died, encircled multiple times in red ink. The words pressed so hard they'd torn through the paper. Rescued 23 teenagers from trafficking pipeline. He actually saved them. Someone who gives a damn. Detective Santos leaned over Lucas's shoulder, her investigator's mind already racing through connections and implications. The kid was researching you extensively. This is hours of work, detailed notes, timeline construction. But why would a homeless teenager from Atlanta care so much about a biker club case in Phoenix? Unless she trailed off, reaching for another piece of paper in the folder. The fourth item was a missing persons flyer, the kind that got stapled to telephone poles and forgotten within days. James Monroe, age 14, last seen March 28, 2025, ran from state custody following placement in emergency foster care, considered at risk, possible mental health crisis following mother's death. Contact Atlanta PD or Georgia DFCS with any information. The photograph showed James in what was probably a school picture from happier times, wearing a forced smile that didn't reach his eyes. The standard language of a broken system that lost thousands of kids every year and barely tried to find them, that classified traumatized children as mental health crises instead of victims needing protection. Like and subscribe. because what comes next will shatter everything you thought you knew about this story. The final item was folded so many times the creases had worn soft as fabric. Lucas unfolded it with careful hands, treating it like the precious artifact it was. Lined notebook paper, the kind sold in dollar stores, filled with handwriting that wavered between controlled and shaky. A woman writing while dying, fighting to get words down before time ran out. My dearest James, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you ran like I told you to. Good boy, smart boy, stay away from Atlanta. Marco Vega's people will come for you because of what you saw that night outside our apartment building, because you can identify faces and vehicles, because you're a witness to attempted kidnapping and a loose end they can't afford. I should have called the police immediately when those men tried to grab you. I should have screamed for help, should have made a scene, should have done anything except what I did, confront them alone and threaten to report them. I was trying to be strong, trying to protect you myself, and that pride killed me, baby. I'm so sorry. 3 days after I confronted those men trying to pull you into their van, I started getting sick. Just a little tired at first. Then the headaches. Then the vomiting that wouldn't stop. Then the pain everywhere. The doctors say aggressive cancer, stage 4, metastatic, nothing they can do. But the timeline is impossible, James. People don't go from healthy to terminal in 3 weeks. I think they poisoned me. I think they wanted me dead so you'd be vulnerable, alone, easy to take. The state would put you in the system, and the system is exactly where they recruit kids like you. I found out about Lucas and the Hells Angels by accident. I was researching the men who came after you, trying to identify them, and I found articles about the Rico case. Marco Vega's trafficking ring, 23 kids rescued. And this man Lucas. A biker, a Hells Angel, someone I'd normally be terrified of. He was the one who'd brought the whole operation down. He'd found evidence and gone to the FBI. He'd testified. He'd actually given a damn when most people looked away. I tried to contact the Phoenix chapter. I wrote letters, sent emails to their legal office, but I got too sick too fast. My handwriting got too shaky. My mind got too foggy. I don't know if they ever received anything. James, if you end up in Phoenix somehow, and I have this strange feeling you will, like fate is pulling you there, find Lucas. Tell him your mother said thank you for trying to stop monsters. Tell him what happened to us. Tell him you need protection, because you do. Don't be too proud to ask for help, baby. Don't make my mistake. I love you more than words can hold. Stay alive. That's all that matters now. Stay alive. Mom. Lucas read it twice, each word landing like shrapnel finding flesh, opening wounds that would never fully heal. James hadn't ended up behind his house by coincidence or random chance. The kid had been looking for him specifically, following his dead mother's final instructions, seeking protection from the one person who'd proven he fought against the same evil that had destroyed their lives. But James had been too scared or too broken or too traumatized to actually knock on the door and ask for help. Instead, he'd hidden in shadows, surviving on scraps and hope, watching Lucas's family from a distance, probably trying to work up the courage to make contact. And when Marco Vega's people came for revenge, James had made his choice. He'd stepped out of the shadows and into the line of fire, repaying a debt Lucas hadn't even known existed. Jesus Christ, Jessica whispered, reading over his shoulder with tears streaming down her face. His mother was murdered, poisoned, because she protected him from traffickers. And those traffickers worked for the exact same man you helped put in federal prison. This child has been running and hiding for almost a year, and he finally found someone he thought could help him, but he was too afraid to ask. So he just watched us, protected us from a distance. And when the moment came, he gave up his life for ours. Detective Santos was already on her phone, speaking rapidly to someone at Atlanta PD, requesting Catherine Monroe's complete medical records, autopsy results, toxicology reports. If this woman was poisoned, we need proof. And we need to understand how deep Marco Vega's operation really went. The Rico case focused on Arizona, Nevada, and New Mexico. Nobody knew Atlanta was in the pipeline. This changes the entire scope. Lucas felt rage building in his chest like pressure in a sealed container, hot and righteous and barely controlled. This boy, this brilliant, brave, traumatized boy, had lost everything to the same monsters Lucas had fought. And instead of breaking, instead of giving up, James had traveled 2,000 miles following his dying mother's instructions, had survived 6 months on the streets, had found his way to the one person who might understand. Reaper appeared in the doorway, his weathered face grim with new information. "Lucas, we got a serious problem. Hospital security just radioed that there's a medical supply delivery driver on the 4th floor, but the company says they didn't schedule any deliveries tonight. The guy's moving through the building like he knows the layout, avoiding cameras. And one of our prospects got a look at him. Matches the description of Carlos Mendoza, Marco Vega's second lieutenant." Lucas's head snapped up, every muscle tensing for action. Where is he now? Lost him in the east stairwell about 90 seconds ago. Could be anywhere in the building. Detective Santos already had her weapon drawn, speaking rapidly into her radio to dispatch more units to the hospital. But Lucas knew Phoenix PD was at least 5 minutes out. 5 minutes was an eternity when a killer was hunting. Jessica's face drained of color. "Olivia, she's still in the waiting room. She's surrounded by 50 club brothers," Reaper assured her, his voice steady. "No one's getting within 10 feet of her without going through them first. She's safe. But if someone's in this hospital hunting..." The lights flickered once, then twice. Then the overhead fluorescence went dark for a full 3 seconds before the emergency backup systems kicked in, bathing the hallway in dim red emergency lighting. A fire alarm began blaring throughout the building, shrill and insistent, the sound designed to create urgency and panic. Hospital protocol would require immediate evacuation of all non-critical patients and staff. In minutes, chaos would flood every floor, exactly the cover a professional assassin needed to move undetected. Lucas started running toward the ICU, where James lay unconscious, defenseless, and completely vulnerable. He'd made it maybe 20 feet down the hallway, when through the observation window, he saw a man in medical scrubs slip through the door into James's room. The build was wrong for a doctor, too muscular, too controlled. The walk was wrong, predatory, purposeful, and tucked into his waistband, barely visible beneath the scrub top, was the distinctive checkered grip of a Glock 19. Lucas hit the door at full speed, shoulder driving into the reinforced hospital door hard enough to send pain radiating down his arm. The man inside turned, and Lucas recognized his face from FBI briefings and prosecution evidence photos. Carlos Mendoza, Marco Vega's most loyal enforcer, the man who'd beaten federal charges on a technicality, the one who'd walked free while his boss rotted in a cell. Mendoza's hand moved toward the weapon at his waist, but his eyes were locked not on Lucas, but on the unconscious 14-year-old connected to machines and monitors, the boy who'd already taken one bullet and somehow survived. Mendoza's finger found the grip of his pistol, drawing it smoothly, but he didn't aim it at Lucas. He aimed it at the 4-line running into James's arm, at the ventilator tube, at the machines keeping the boy alive. Shooting James directly would be loud and obvious, but sabotaging his life support during a fire alarm evacuation? That would look like chaos and confusion, just another tragedy in an emergency. "Step away from him," Lucas growled, positioning himself between the gunman and the bed. Mendoza smiled, cold and empty. "Marco sends his regards from federal prison. You destroyed our operation, testified against our family, sent 15 good men to rot in cells. Did you think there wouldn't be consequences? This homeless kid tried to play hero. Now he pays. After him, we finished the job with your wife and daughter." Lucas's world narrowed to a single point of absolute clarity. This man had come to murder a child, and then he was going to kill Jessica and Olivia. That wasn't happening. Not today. Not ever. Lucas lunged forward just as Mendoza squeezed the trigger, but not at James. The shot was deafening in the enclosed space, and every monitor in the room went dark as the bullet tore through the electrical panel on the wall, plunging them into complete darkness. Emergency systems were already taxed by the building-wide alarm. This room was now totally black. Lucas heard Mendoza moving, heard the scrape of shoes on linoleum. And then he heard something else, something impossible. James's voice, weak and rasping, but absolutely conscious. "Lucas, behind you." Lucas spun in complete darkness, just as something hard and unforgiving connected with his ribs. Mendoza's elbow, driven with the professional precision of someone who'd trained extensively in close-quarters combat. The impact landed exactly where it needed to steal breath and create maximum pain, driving the air from Lucas's lungs in an explosive gasp. He staggered sideways, his boots slipping on the smooth hospital floor, but muscle memory from 20 years of street fighting and club brawls kept him upright when his conscious mind would have let him fall. The room was pitch black except for the thinnest sliver of red emergency lighting bleeding under the door from the hallway. Barely enough to distinguish shadows from deeper shadows, nowhere near enough to see clearly or anticipate the next attack. James's warning had saved Lucas's life, but the realization that the boy was conscious now, awake and aware after flatlining minutes earlier, sent a fresh surge of adrenaline through Lucas's system. The kid was gasping for air in the darkness, struggling without the ventilator that had been mechanically breathing for him, his damaged lung trying to function on its own after catastrophic trauma. Lucas could hear the wet, labored sound of each breath, the sound of someone drowning in open air, suffocating 3 feet away, while Lucas fought for both their lives against a professional killer who'd infiltrated a building filled with 500 bikers and armed police. "Reaper!" Lucas roared with everything his compressed lungs could manage, hoping his voice would carry through the reinforced ICU door over the blaring fire alarm that continued to shriek throughout the building. "ICU room 4. Now." Mendoza moved again in the darkness, a shadow detaching from other shadows, and Lucas heard the distinctive metallic sound of a slide being racked, a round chambering into a firing position. The assassin was done with close combat, preparing to finish this with bullets. Darkness be damned. Lucas threw himself sideways in a desperate tackle toward where instinct told him Mendoza stood, his shoulder driving into what he hoped was center mass. Both men crashed into the mobile medical equipment surrounding James's bed with devastating force. Metal frames collapsed, plastic monitors shattered, for stands toppled, and something sharp, glass or metal, Lucas couldn't tell, sliced a burning line across his forearm deep enough that he felt hot blood immediately soaking his sleeve. The gunshot that followed was so close the muzzle flash burned itself into Lucas's retinas, temporarily destroying what little night vision he'd managed to develop. The concussive blast in the enclosed space made his ears ring with a high-pitched whine that drowned out everything else. He felt the bullet's passage inches from his head, felt the air displacement against his cheek, heard it punch through drywall with a sound like a fist hitting wet cardboard. But Lucas's hands had found their target during the collision, Mendoza's gun arm, the wrist and forearm solid with muscle and tendon. He gripped with both hands, using his body weight as leverage, and slammed the arm repeatedly against the metal bed frame with savage determination. Once, twice, 3 times, each impact accompanied by Mendoza's grunts of pain and effort. Lucas was trying to break the wrist, shatter bones, force the weapon loose, anything to neutralize the immediate threat. Mendoza proved stronger than his wiry frame suggested, the kind of enhanced strength that came from either fanatic dedication to strength training or pharmaceutical assistance, possibly both. He twisted his body with practiced efficiency and drove his knee into Lucas's stomach with enough force to fold him completely in half. The air exploded from Lucas's lungs for the second time in 30 seconds, and white spots danced across his already compromised vision. Pain radiated outward from his solar plexus in waves that threatened to shut down his ability to think, to react, to fight. The ICU door exploded inward with a crash that somehow cut through even the fire alarm screaming. Reaper came through first like a freight train, his 6'4" frame filling the doorway, followed immediately by 3 other club members whose names Lucas couldn't remember through the pain and adrenaline. Their silhouettes were backlit by the red emergency lighting from the hallway, creating an effect like demons emerging from Hell's Gateway. Lights, someone shouted. Maybe Colt, the young prospect who'd been standing guard earlier. And a powerful tactical flashlight beam cut through the darkness like a sword. The illumination revealed the chaos. Mendoza pinned against James's hospital bed. Lucas doubled over with both hands locked on the assassin's gun arm. Medical equipment destroyed and scattered across the floor, and James himself sitting partially upright against his pillows, one hand clutching his chest where the bullet had torn through 6 hours earlier. The boy's face was gray with oxygen deprivation, his lips tinged an alarming blue, but his eyes were open and aware and tracking everything happening around him with desperate intensity. Mendoza saw the tactical situation shift catastrophically against him in the span of a heartbeat. 5 against 1, in close quarters, with nowhere to run and backup that would never arrive. He made the instant calculation of a survivor and changed tactics with frightening speed. He released his grip on the Glock, letting the weapon clatter to the floor between them, and in the same fluid motion grabbed a fistful of the 4 lines still connected to James's arm. The central line running directly into the subclavian vein, the arterial line monitoring blood pressure, the medication drip keeping infection at bay. Everyone back off right now, or I rip these out, and your hero kid bleeds internally before you can get help. Mendoza snarled, his voice carrying absolute conviction. His fingers tightened visibly on the tubes, his other hand moving to grip the central line catheter insertion point at James's collarbone. One pull, and he's got air embolisms in his heart. 2 minutes, he's dead. Your choice. Lucas froze. Everyone froze. They were standing in a dark room during a building-wide evacuation, medical staff scattered throughout Phoenix General dealing with chaos on every floor. And James was already critical enough that the attending physician had given him less than 50-50 odds of surviving the night. Mendoza violently removing those lines could cause catastrophic hemorrhaging, introduce air bubbles into his bloodstream that would stop his heart, create a dozen complications that would kill the boy in the time it took to find a doctor who wasn't busy evacuating patients. You're not walking out of here, Lucas said, forcing his voice to remain deadly calm despite the rage and fear warring in his chest. Hospital security has your face on camera. Phoenix PD Tactical is 30 seconds out, probably already in the stairwell. You've got nowhere to go, no escape route, no backup coming. It's over. Then I guess we all go down together, Mendoza snarled back, his lips pulling away from his teeth in something that wasn't quite a smile. His fingers tightened another fraction on the 4 tubes, and Lucas saw James flinch with pain as the catheter insertion point pulled against tissue. Starting with this kid who should have minded his own damn business instead of playing hero for people he didn't even know. That's when James spoke, his voice weak and rasping from oxygen deprivation and the endotracheal tube they'd removed too recently, but carrying absolute clarity and purpose despite the physical struggle each word required. You killed my mother. He paused to drag in a gasping breath, his damaged lung protesting. Atlanta, March. 6 months ago. Catherine Monroe. Another breath, this one even more labored. You poisoned her because she stopped you from taking me that night outside our apartment building. Every word was clearly an immense effort, every breath costing him. But James pushed through with the desperate need of someone who'd carried this truth alone for too long. I saw your face. I memorized every detail. I'll never forget your face. You took everything from me. Mendoza's expression shifted, not surprise, but recognition dawning. His eyes narrowed as he studied James's face more carefully, as memory connected present to past. The Monroe kid from Atlanta. We've been looking for you for 6 months. Vega wanted you disappeared permanently because you could identify the entire Atlanta pipeline. Faces, locations, vehicles, everything. Your mother made that hard by dying messy and attracting police attention, making us lie low. Should have just let us have you, kid. Would have saved your mom. Saved everyone a lot of trouble. The casual admission of murder, of deliberately poisoning a woman and then hunting her orphan child across state lines, flipped a switch in Lucas's mind. Something broke loose from the chains he'd been keeping on his rage, the guilt he'd been carrying since learning James's story. He released Mendoza's wrist and drove his fist straight into the man's exposed throat with every ounce of strength, rage, and protective fury he'd been holding back. The impact crushed cartilage, collapsed the windpipe, hit with the force of someone who'd spent decades in bar fights and street brawls and knew exactly where to strike for maximum damage. Mendoza's grip on the four lines released instantly, as both his hands flew to his crushed throat, his body's survival instincts overriding tactical thinking. His mouth opened in a silent scream, no air moving through the damaged windpipe, his face already darkening from oxygen deprivation. Reaper and the other club members moved with coordinated precision, grabbing Mendoza's arms and dragging him violently away from James's bed. They slammed him face first into the tile floor with enough force that Lucas heard something crack. Nose or cheekbone, maybe both. Like and subscribe, because the impossible choice Lucas makes next will change everything. Get medical in here immediately. Lucas shouted toward the door, toward anyone who could hear. His hands moved to James's side, wanting to help, but having no idea how. The boy was still struggling to breathe, his chest heaving with desperate effort, his lips now distinctly blue in the flashlight beam. Lucas had no medical training beyond the basic first aid every club member learned. Nothing that would help with gunshot wounds and oxygen deprivation and the catastrophic failure of a 14-year-old body pushed past every limit. Then Jessica was there, shouldering past the club members crowding the doorway, her nurse instincts and training overriding the terror that should have paralyzed her. She moved with the swift efficiency of someone who'd spent 7 years in emergency rooms, hands already assessing James's condition before she'd fully reached the bedside. She checked his airways with practiced fingers, adjusted his positioning to optimize lung function, and began manually supporting his breathing while simultaneously barking orders with the authority of someone used to being obeyed in crisis situations. He needs oxygen now. The ventilator's dead. Someone get me an ambu bag from the crash cart in the hallway. Portable oxygen tank. Move now. Her voice cut through the chaos with surgical precision. One of the prospects. Lucas thought it might be Danny, ran immediately. And get the lights back on in this room. I can't assess his condition in the dark. Hospital security arrived within seconds, followed by Phoenix PD tactical units responding to multiple reports of gunfire in the ICU. They took custody of Mendoza, who was still gasping and choking from the crushed windpipe, his face purple and swollen. They cuffed his hands behind his back with aggressive force and dragged him into the hallway, reading him rights he probably couldn't hear through the pain and oxygen deprivation. Detective Santos appeared in the doorway, taking in the destroyed room, the injured boy, the club members, and the assassin being hauled away. Her eyes found Lucas, and he saw understanding there. This situation had escalated beyond normal law enforcement protocols. Danny returned with the ambu bag and portable oxygen. Jessica worked with focused intensity, manually ventilating James while checking his vitals by feel and observation. The boy's eyes were open, tracking her movements, showing awareness despite the obvious struggle. "Stay with me, James," she murmured, her voice shifting to the gentle tone she used with Olivia during nightmares. "You're doing great. Just keep breathing with me. In and out. That's it." "We can't stay here," Lucas said, watching Jessica work to keep James alive manually, watching the boy's chest rise and fall with her assistance. His mind was already racing through options and contingencies. Mendoza got through hospital security, past 500 of my brothers, into this secured ICU room during a fire alarm. We're almost certain he triggered himself. Marco Vega's network has resources and reach deeper than any of us realized. They'll send someone else. Maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow, but they'll come. James is critical. Jessica protested without looking up from her patient, her hands maintaining steady rhythm on the ambu bag, forcing oxygen into damaged lungs. Moving him could kill him. He needs ICU-level care, continuous monitoring, surgical follow-up if he starts bleeding internally again, infection control, respiratory support. I can keep him alive for a few minutes like this, but not hours, not days. Staying here definitely kills him. Reaper interjected from where he stood guard at the door. Lucas is right. Vegas people just proved they can reach him anywhere in this building, probably in any building. Normal security measures don't work against people with this kind of funding and commitment. We need to take him somewhere completely off the grid, somewhere they can't find and can't reach. Lucas made a decision that would have seemed absolutely insane 24 hours ago, but now felt like the only logical option available. We take him completely off the grid. The club has connections. Former Army Special Forces medic named Derek Cooper runs a private recovery facility outside Las Vegas in rural Nevada. He handles off-books medical cases for people who can't go to regular hospitals for various reasons. Discreet, secure, fully equipped. He owes us for getting his teenage daughter out of a human trafficking situation 3 years back, brought her home safe when the cops said there was nothing they could do. We medevac James there tonight on the club's helicopter, set up rotating armed security, keep him alive and hidden until Vega's entire network is completely dismantled. Detective Santos shook her head firmly. That's removing a material witness and attempted murder victim from protective custody before we've even established formal protective custody. I can't officially sanction that. The DA would have my badge. Then unofficially look the other way for 48 hours, Lucas said, meeting her eyes directly. Your system couldn't protect this kid 6 months ago in Atlanta when his mother was murdered and he went into state custody. It won't protect him now, not from people with Vega's resources. But my club can. We will. We'll die before we let anyone else touch him. Jessica stared at Lucas while still manually ventilating James, tears cutting clean tracks through the grime and blood on her face. I'm not letting him go alone. He wakes up in some strange place surrounded by strangers after everything he's been through. He'll be terrified. He'll think we abandoned him like everyone else has. I'm going with him. Jessica, Olivia needs her mother. Olivia needs her mother to do the right thing. Jessica cut him off, her voice brooking absolutely no argument. This boy saved our daughter's life. He took a bullet meant for her. I'm not abandoning him now just because it's complicated or scary. Your club can protect all of us together, or just protect him alone. Your choice, Lucas. But I'm going to Nevada, and nothing you say will change that. Lucas saw the fierce determination in her eyes, the same protective instinct she showed Olivia, now extended to a homeless teenager who'd become part of their family the instant he threw himself at armed men on their lawn. Okay, we all go together. Reaper, arrange the medevac immediately. Use the club's contact at the private airfield in Glendale. Call Cooper in Nevada. Tell him we're inbound with a critical 14-year-old gunshot victim and we need full ICU capability plus heavy security. Tell him to prepare for extended stay. The next 20 minutes passed in controlled chaos. They stabilized James enough for transport using portable equipment, loaded him onto a specialized medical gurney with battery-powered oxygen and monitoring systems. The club formed a protective corridor through the hospital, 500 bikers creating an impenetrable human wall between James and any further attacks. They moved through the building still in controlled chaos from the fire alarm, reaching the rooftop helipad where a medical helicopter waited with rotor blades already spinning, creating wind that whipped hair and clothing. As they loaded James's semi-conscious form into the aircraft, he drifted in and out from oxygen deprivation and sheer exhaustion. Jessica climbed in beside him without hesitation, refusing to release his hand. Lucas was about to follow when he heard shouting behind them. Olivia appeared, running across the rooftop with Mrs. Chun and 2 club members trailing frantically behind, the 8-year-old's face twisted with panic. Mom, Dad. She screamed over the helicopter's deafening rotor noise, her small voice barely audible. Olivia grabbed her mother's arm through the open aircraft door, her eyes wide with the kind of fear children shouldn't have to experience. Mom, that delivery man, the bad man they arrested downstairs, he's not the right one. Lucas felt ice flood his veins, cold and absolute. What are you talking about? When the police were putting him in their car downstairs, I was watching from the window with Mrs. Chun. I saw his face clearly under the lights. Olivia's voice shook but remained clear. He gave me the same smile, as one of the men from our house this afternoon. The ones who tried to hurt us. And Dad, he's wearing the exact same backpack the men at our house had. The black one with the red stripe. I remember because I thought it looked like my school bag. Detective Santos was already sprinting toward the roof access elevator, screaming into her radio for units to stop the transport vehicle, to secure the prisoner, to verify identity immediately. But Lucas knew with sickening, absolute certainty they hadn't caught Carlos Mendoza. They'd caught a decoy, a sacrifice, someone sent to create chaos and draw attention while the Real assassin moved freely through the building. And Olivia had just been standing in that building, vulnerable and exposed, exactly where the real killer could have reached her. Lucas scooped Olivia into his arms and practically threw her into the helicopter beside Jessica, his heart hammering with the realization that the real Carlos Mendoza was still hunting somewhere in Phoenix General. "Go now," he screamed at the pilot over the rotor noise. "Get them out of here." He slammed the aircraft door closed and pounded twice on the fuselage, the signal to lift off immediately. The helicopter rose into the Phoenix night sky, carrying James, Jessica, and Olivia away from immediate danger, while Lucas and Reaper coordinated with Detective Santos on the ground. The decoy they'd arrested turned out to be a low-level enforcer named Miguel Torres, someone disposable that Vega's network had sacrificed to create chaos. The real Mendoza had slipped out of the hospital during the confusion, disappearing into the city like smoke. But he'd failed his primary mission. James was gone, untraceable, protected by people who would die before letting anyone reach him. 3 days later, James woke in a place that looked nothing like any hospital he'd ever seen. The room was small but comfortable, more like a bedroom than a medical facility, with wooden walls and a window showing desert landscape stretching toward distant mountains. Medical equipment surrounded his bed, monitors for scans, oxygen, but it felt less clinical, more like someone's home. His shoulder screamed with pain when he tried to move, and his breathing still felt wrong, labored, like his lung wasn't fully cooperating yet. The door opened, and Lucas walked in, followed by a man in his 50s with military short gray hair and the calm competence of someone who'd seen everything. "Welcome back, James," Lucas said, genuine relief flooding his weathered face. "This is Derek Cooper. You're at his facility outside Las Vegas. You've been unconscious for 3 days while your body tried to remember how to stay alive." James's voice came out as a rasp. "Olivia? Jessica? Safe. Both safe. They're down the hall." "Jessica wouldn't leave, been sleeping in the room next door, checking on you every 2 hours." Lucas pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down, his expression serious. "We need to talk, kid. I need to understand something. Why'd you do it? You had no reason to die for my family. You didn't even know us." James was quiet for a long moment, staring at the ceiling, gathering words that had been locked inside him for 6 months. "I had no reason to live for me," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "My mom died. The system didn't want me. Nobody knew I existed or cared if I disappeared. I was just nothing. But when I saw those men going after Olivia, I thought about what my mom did. She fought them to protect me, and it killed her. Maybe that's what you do when you're nothing. You become something by protecting someone who still has a future." That raw honesty cracked something open in Lucas's chest. Over the next 2 weeks, as James slowly healed under Cooper's expert care, Lucas learned more about the boy who'd saved his daughter. The club members visited constantly, Reaper teaching James about motorcycle mechanics, Colt showing him basic self-defense moves modified for his injured shoulder, others bringing books about coding and artificial intelligence that James devoured hungrily. Jessica spent hours talking with him, learning about Catherine Monroe, about Atlanta, about dreams of working on machine learning systems like the ones powering ChatGPT and Claude that James had studied in libraries using stolen Wi-Fi. The club held a vote on James's future 3 weeks after the attack. Lucas proposed something unprecedented: full protection under the Hells Angels, education funding, a place to live, medical care, everything James's mother had wanted for him. Not membership. He was far too young, but something deeper. Family. Brotherhood. Belonging. The vote was unanimous, 57 members voting yes, without a single dissent. Like and subscribe. This story's final twist will hit you harder than anything that came before. As James began physical therapy, learning to use his shoulder again despite the nerve damage that would never fully heal, he also learned about loyalty and purpose. Club members taught him practical skills. Reaper showed him how to rebuild a carburetor. Danny taught him computer security techniques that the tech industry would have paid six figures for. Lucas himself spent hours explaining the code of the club, what brotherhood really meant. 6 months passed. James transformed from a starving, desperate kid into someone with direction, confidence, and belonging. He put on healthy weight, his eyes lost that haunted look, and he started talking about the future again. Maybe studying cybersecurity, maybe helping the club with their digital infrastructure, maybe using his coding skills to fight trafficking operations like the one that had destroyed his life. But the revelation that changed everything came on James's 15th birthday. Lucas handed him a sealed manila envelope, his expression unreadable. Your mother sent this to our club's legal office in Phoenix 2 days before she died. It got buried in archived mail, mixed up with legal correspondence about the RICO case. We only found it last week when our lawyer was organizing files. I've read it, James. You need to read it too. It explains everything. Why you ended up behind my house. Why this all happened the way it did. James's hands trembled as he opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. His mother's handwriting filled 2 pages, words written while dying, while fighting to stay conscious long enough to finish. He read the first page, her instructions to find Lucas, her gratitude for destroying Vega's operation, her desperate hope that the Hells Angels would protect her son when she no longer could. Then he turned to the second page, and the first line made his hands shake so violently he almost dropped the paper. Dear Hells Angels, if you're reading this, I'm dead and my son is running. His father was one of you. A Phoenix chapter member named Marcus Ghost Reynolds who died in a motorcycle accident in 2012, 3 years after James was born. He never knew he had a son. I never told him I was pregnant because I was scared of his world, scared of what it would mean for our baby. But Ghost was a good man who stood against evil, and his son just proved he inherited that courage. James deserves to know where he came from. He deserves his father's family. Please, take care of him. He's the last piece of Ghost that still exists in this world. Lucas watched James read, watched comprehension and shock and understanding wash across the boy's face. Marcus Reynolds was my best friend, Lucas said quietly. He died saving a family from a house fire. Ran in when everyone else ran out. Never knew he had a kid. If we'd known. He paused, emotion thick in his voice. You were never alone, James. You were always one of us. Your father's blood runs through this club. Welcome home, son. Welcome home. James looked up from the letter, tears streaming down his face, and for the first time in a year, he felt something other than loss and fear. He felt like he belonged. Like he'd found what his mother had been trying to give him all along, not just protection, but family.